Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello, this is Andrew Wommack, and welcome to our Monday Night Truth and Liberty live cast. Man, we're going to have a great time tonight. I've got Richard Harris here. He's my co-host. He's our chief... what do you call
Counsel.
it? Chief counsel. Anyway, he's a blessing. He does all of the work. And anyway, we've got as our guest tonight David Cortman, and he's with Alliance Defending Freedom, who is on the front lines really doing a lot of great things. And I tell you, they've got some cases that they are dealing with right now, and he's got a perspective on what's happening in our culture, whether we're winning or losing, and I think it'll really be good. We hear so much bad news. It's nice to hear some good news, and I tell you, Alliance Defending Freedom is doing a great, great job. So we'll be going to David in a few minutes, but first of all, this is Richard Harris, and we've got ways that you can join us tonight, and you can send in questions for David or for Richard or me, and we will interact with you. And we've also got a book that we're going to give away, so share with them how they can get involved.
Sure,
Richard?
Absolutely. Well, just want to tell everybody thank you for watching. We're so excited to have you with us tonight. And I wanted to share a little bit of information with you about our website. First of all, we've got a lot of great resources on our website. It's truthandliberty.net. And so I encourage you to go to the resources tab, pull that down, and see what we've got there. One of the things you may not know is we have a 24-hour news feed on truthandliberty.net where we pull from our favorite news sources, objective and conservative viewpoint sources, where you can get the good news that you don't get on all the other networks. So I encourage you to check that out.
Richard, let me mention too that we just found out that Facebook has been systematically censoring us. We had E.W. Jackson on just a couple of weeks ago, and he's a black pastor from the D.C. area, and he was saying things that they didn't like, and they just cut it out a couple of times.
That's right. They canned 2 of our videos of E.W. Jackson. And
so if you want to make sure that you get the whole broadcast tonight, you can go to CTN. They're broadcasting this by satellite to all of their network, but then also you can go to truthandliberty.net, and that way you'll make sure that you don't get cut off.
That's right. Well, so we've also got some great events coming up here I want to share with you. First thing is this week, July 18th to 20th, is the Stand for Truth and Liberty Conference with Bishop E.W. Jackson and a number of other great guests. Of course, Andrew's going to be ministering. We've got David Barton, Tim Barton, Bill Federer is going to be here live and in person, Iverson Jackson, Cecil Bly, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and Dr. Melvin Johnson. All are going to be here this week, and it's going to be a great time. I'm really looking forward to that. And then coming up in August 2nd, we have the Kingdom Youth Conference with Todd White is going to be here. That is going to be a fantastic event. And then our healing is here in August 13th through 16th. That's always an amazing, miracles, blind eyes, deaf ears, people getting out of wheelchairs. It's an awesome time in the Lord. And then I'm excited about something we've got scheduled for September. It's called the In God We Trust Rally, Restoring Faith, Family, and Freedom to Colorado. You can check out, get more information on our website there at truthandliberty.net/rally. We're going to be coming together as believers in the state of Colorado to network and get connected so that we can begin to turn this state back. Colorado used to be a pretty conservative place, Andrew, but it's become pretty solid blue lately, but we're going to make a difference.
And we're going to have state senator and a state representative speaking. We've asked our congressman from Washington to come. We hadn't heard back, have we?
No, hopefully he'll be able to make it.
But we've also requested somebody from the White House. Don't know if they're going to show up, but man, wouldn't that be awesome?
That would be.
Anyway, we're trying to make a difference here in Colorado. We aren't going to go quietly into the night. We're fighting against it. So we'd love for you to be a part of that.
That's right. And every week on the livecast, we give a little gift away. If you're not registered on our website, you need to be so that you can receive our newsletter every week. And if you register, you become eligible to receive our free product giveaway. Last week, we gave away How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will, one of Andrew's great teachings. And congratulations, Diana Walters. You won that. So that's awesome. And this week, we're giving away Lessons from Elijah. This is a great book, Andrew. There's the Place Called There teaching is in this book. That teaching can change your life. I'm telling you, it's about where you find God's provision for your life. And so I encourage you to register on our website. And like Andrew said when we first got started tonight, this is an interactive process for our viewers. So we encourage you to post your comments and your questions. If you're watching on our website, you can do it in the live chat feature. And if you're watching by Facebook, you can do it in the comment section, although we encourage you to watch on the website so you can have a solid feed there. And we'll take your questions, and Mr. Cortman and Andrew and I will do our best to get to all those. So be sure to put your questions on there. And then I want to mention that we are a viewer-supported live cast, and we encourage you to text GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 719-301-2552, or you can go on our website on the donate function there, and we really appreciate your generosity. And then if you're in need of prayer tonight, you can click the prayer button on our website on the live cast, or you can call 719-635-1111 and be connected to a trained prayer minister who can chat with you and visit with you and minister to your needs. So,
and let me just interject one thing here before we leave this topic, and that is that, you said we're viewer supported, and we've not really pushed this very much, but now that we have the 501c4, we have to have a clear break between my nonprofit and the for-profit arm. And so if you have given in the past, that's all gone into our nonprofit, but now we need people to give into the Truth and Liberty 501c4. You don't get a tax-deductible receipt, but we need this income in order to be able to do this rally that we're talking about. And so you can call that number, 719-635-1111, and those people can take your gift right there. And we need somebody to grease the tracks so we can get more involved in this political process.
That's right.
Is that everything?
That's everything I've got.
All right, so tonight we have as our guest David Cortman. He is one of the lawyers. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he can correct me on all of this stuff. I think he's over a number of the lawyers that are involved in Alliance Defending Freedom. This is an organization that I think Michael Ferris is the head of this. Am I correct in saying that? And anyway, they represent all kinds of conservative causes, have all argued cases in front of the Supreme Court, and have won a number of decisions in favor of the conservatives and Christianity. And so David and his organization, man, praise God that we've got people out there that are devoting their time and effort to this. So David, we welcome you to our broadcast tonight. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
And so you're remoting in from one of the suburbs of Atlanta, I heard.
That's right. We have offices not only around the world, but here in the U.S. and Phoenix, outside of Phoenix, and in Washington, D.C., and outside of Atlanta also.
Okay, so before we get to talking about specifics, you might just give the viewers an overview of what Alliance Defending Freedom is, how you got formed, why you're there, and what you do.
Sure. We're a not-for-profit legal ministry, international. We've been around about 25 years. And basically, we advocate for the right of people to freely live out their faith. As you mentioned, we litigate. We've supported or worked on over 50 cases at the Supreme Court of the United States. We've won 9 cases in the last 8 terms at the court. And we engage in strategy. We teach other attorneys to do the work that we do, law students, college students. We engage in training and funding for other groups, and so we've got a lot going on.
So how many lawyers do you have and support staff there? What's the size of ADF?
Yeah, we have a total over 250 employees totally. We've got about 50 people on the legal team in the United States. We've got another like number internationally speaking. So there's a fairly large group. We also have over 3,000 what we call allied attorneys who do the similar work to us around the United States.
So do you actually argue cases overseas in different courts?
We do.
Countries?
We do. We have attorneys that are international attorneys in different cities around the world who go to the international courts.
All right, so before we get into some of the specifics about the cases, I know Richard, he's a lawyer and he can talk lawyer with you and probably do this better than I can. But just quickly, could you give us an overview of where we stand in this nation? I know that we're in a battle, and I know that there's a long ways to go. The battle is never ending, but I mean, are we winning? Are we losing? Is it a draw? What's happening?
No, I think we are winning, and I think you're right. It is never ending. I don't expect it to end, but I think we are winning. ADF, we win over 80% of all of our cases filed, and
Praise
that's
God.
hundreds of cases a year. Like I said, we've been victorious in dozens and dozens of cases at the Supreme Court, at 9 in the last 8 terms. So we are, and what that takes, it takes people of faith and conservatives to become involved, to know what's going on in your area, to be informed, to be active. And I think that's important for people. Regardless of where you find yourself, you could make a difference, whether it's at the local school board, the city council, or even in state legislators.
And you know, when Michael Ferris was with us in November of last year, he made a statement that just really resonated with me, that the majority of Americans are not liberal and they are not extreme, but it has been pushed on us through the court system. And they have gone against the wishes or the will of the majority of Americans. And so we've commented on this. I would like you, as one of the leading attorneys, to comment on what Trump has done to change this liberal court system. How's that going?
Yeah, and it's not only the court system, but the media. People feel like if you're conservative or if you have conservative social values, or you're a person of faith, that you're the only one. It's just you. It's just you out there. But it's not that way. It's actually the smaller part that are vocal, and that's what we keep hearing about from the media. But I think one thing that's important when people talk about time to vote, one of the things most important about presidential elections is the judges and justices that they get to appoint. Most of them are appointed for a lifetime, at least in federal courts, and they do make the law. And so what happens is President Trump has done a great job in appointing those who are will uphold the Constitution, not those who believe it's evolving or a changing document that's meaning changes according to the way culture is going, but it has a specific meaning and was enacted for a specific purpose. And so President Obama, he was in office, moved almost every circuit, the courts around the country, that became much more liberal. And President Trump has been able to appoint some conservative justices who are upholding the Constitution and its original meaning.
And you know, I'm not a lawyer by any means, so I just hear about these things in passing, but I've heard that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is basically a slam dunk for liberals. And just recently I saw a headline that the Ninth, let's see, home run in the ninth, is the way it was stated. And it sounds like, has the balance there changed? Has Trump appointed somebody, or what's happening there?
It started to, and what's interesting is about the Ninth Circuit, some of the judges used to brag about being the most overturned circuit court in the country, because they are. So we always tease that one of the best ways to get the Supreme Court to hear your case is to lose at the Ninth Circuit, take it up to Supreme Court, because they're the most reverse court once it gets up there. But I think we're making some headway there also.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So, Richard, you had some questions. It'd be better for you to ask than me.
Well,
You'll sound intelligent when you ask.
Well, you sound great, Andrew. Before I get into the cases, I wanted to ask you something about ADF, David. You had mentioned in the intro there that you guys do some things other than just litigate cases. I think ADF has some materials that are available for pastors and churches and businesses and things like that. Would you like to comment on in a little more detail about those services?
Sure. Specifically, we have what's called the Church and Ministry Alliance. We have a team of attorneys and folks who help churches and religious ministries how to review their documents, their bylaws, their hiring documents, make sure they're in line in case they're challenged, which they likely will be. Oftentimes, religious organizations find themselves in court being challenged because they actually believe in and uphold their religious doctrine. when it comes to membership and hiring and those type of issues. And so we have a service specifically for churches and religious ministries that does an audit, if you will, of their documents to make sure that they're listing all the biblical prerequisites that they want to include as part of their ministries.
Man, we need to take advantage of that. That'd be good. I think we've already had some people speak in on it, but that'd be great.
Yeah.
And one last thing before Richard gets to asking you some questions. You said you have 250 employees, and if I'm not mistaken, you take these cases for people at no charge to them. So you're bound to have a lot of expense. I'd like you to advertise ADF's website and how people could support you if they want to be a part of this.
Well, we do, and we don't charge any of our clients. Some of our cases, some we'll talk about, Arlenes Flowers, Masterpiece Cake Shop, people may have heard about. Just those cases alone, when you get all the way up to the Supreme Court, Arlenes Flowers will be at the Supreme Court for the second time, could cost well over $1 million just for one case. And of course, as you mentioned, we don't charge any of our clients. So you can find out about ADF at adflegal.org. You can call us at 1-800-TELL-ADF. And as you mentioned, we're completely donor supported. We're a 501c3 organization, and we exist just on people's donations and prayers and supporting us in those type of ways.
Man, that's awesome. I appreciate you all doing that. That's great.
That's so good. Well, one of the cases that was decided just recently that I think people would be interested in hearing about, David, is this, it's kind of shorthand for it as the Bladensburg War Memorial case. I don't think that's the official title of the opinion, but you know what I'm talking about. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about that case and what the holding was? And I'd like to know what was ADF's role in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a case about a war memorial that's in the shape of a cross. ADF filed what's called the Friend of the Court brief on behalf of some veteran organizations and some current folks in the military. And the challenge was from a group called the American Humanist Association. And the basic argument was, when we see this cross, we're offended by it. And so therefore it violates the separation of church and state, the Establishment Clause, and the court should take it down. So that's a recent decision that came out from the Supreme Court in the last couple of weeks. And
so what was the holding?
The holding was good. It was a 7-2 majority in the court, and they basically held that just because that war memorial is in the shape of a cross, which everybody agrees is a religious symbol, doesn't mean it violates the Establishment Clause. The court held that what we have to look at is not just whether someone looks at a religious symbol or hears a prayer, but that become offended, it violates the Establishment Clause, but is it consistent with the history and tradition of our country? How long has it been there? This cross has been there about 100 years. It specifically had the purpose of memorializing those who sacrificed their lives, 49 men from Prince George County, and that was a memorial to them. And the court said, given all those factors, it does not violate the Establishment Clause. And interestingly enough, said if we were to take it down, that would show hostility to religion.
Amen.
And that would actually be a violation of the Constitution.
Wow. Well, there was a headline also this week of some Ohio school removed a 10 Commandments plaque that had been up for 100 years after an atheist group objected. So I'm wondering, what's the difference between that and the Bladensburg case? Do you think Bladensburg is paving maybe important in helping us fight back against this secularism that's taking over our society?
Well, I think it is. And what's been happening in the courts is the Establishment Clause has been misinterpreted for a long time by the courts, including the Supreme Court. We'll talk a little bit about some of the tests that the court used, but what they were doing was they would actually use what was called the Lemon Test, a case from 1971 that had to do with school aid. And basically, it was no test at all. It said if you have someone who's a reasonable observer, which basically is the judge and him or herself, would find that it promoted religion, you could strike it down. Well, that's a malleable standard. So what the courts were doing is anything that they saw that was religious, they'd strike it down as a violation of the Establishment Clause. The court more recently has pulled back on that and said, no, that's not the original meaning. The original meaning is not to be hostile to religion. It's to accommodate religion. It's to acknowledge our religious heritage. And so the court's been kind of backing off of that really strict separation of church and state. People may have heard of the wall between, separation between church and state, and that the court has been saying is not the correct original interpretation. And I think that's been a good result as of late.
Well, that's fantastic. You know, the First Amendment cases I've studied, I remember the courts saying things like there has to be a strict neutrality between religion and even non-religion. So sort of like there's some mythical vacuum out there. And the truth is that if you're totally neutral, then atheism and irreligion is going to fill the vacuum. And that's what we've seen, I think. And so are you hopeful that perhaps we're going to be able to have more public expressions of religious faith in America?
I do, because a lot of times, even with the neutrality principle, which is embedded in the case law, the left doesn't even abide by that. What they actually do is treat religious organizations worse than everyone else and expect that to be what the Constitution requires. But people have to keep in mind that there's not only a neutrality principle, but we have a free speech clause, but we also have a free exercise clause in the Constitution, which gives special rights to religious groups and religious organizations. It's not just like everybody else. Of course, that's ignored. Neutrality is ignored, and what we end up with is hostility to get rid of anything religious that finds its way into the public square. And that's just simply an incorrect interpretation.
Well, I heard you mention Masterpiece Bakers in Colorado. Of course, we're familiar with that, and we've had, what was this guy's name?
Jack Phillips.
Jack Phillips. He's been on our Truth and Liberty broadcast. Did you represent him in this case?
We did, and we're on round number 3 in that case, still going on.
That was my question. You won at the Supreme Court, but Colorado will not leave him alone. Is there any way to stop this, or can anybody just keep suing him?
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. So as you mentioned, we won at the Supreme Court of the United States. They basically held that the commission there was hostile to Jack's religion. They didn't treat him neutrally, as you mentioned, to everybody else. They treated him differently. So we won that case, and then the Colorado Commission went back after him again, and so we actually sued them in federal court and got them to dismiss the case. And now the same activist lawyer who was going after Jack as part of the second case is now suing him again in state court. And the reason for that is because these laws that we hear about, that they're going after Jack, that they're going after Arlenes Flowers, Baronelle Stutzman, these public accommodation laws, you hear them non-discrimination laws, they're basically going after people of faith who hold traditional values, who believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. And by the way, every one of these folks serve everyone. That's not the issue they have. They don't want to participate in speech or promote events that violate their beliefs.
So you mentioned Arlenes Flowers a few times, David. Now that's a case really similar to the Jack Phillips case, right? It's the client's name, I think, is, or the woman who runs it is Baronelle Stutzman. That might ring a bell for some people. Tell us about that case and what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, it's another case that's just really incredible. The case has been going on about 6 or 7 years now. Baronelle Stutzman is the owner. This florist, this floral shop has been in her family for decades now. And here's the amazing story behind it people may not realize. What you hear from the media on the left is that, you know, she won't serve anyone and who's from the LGBT community, which is just flat out false. Interestingly, the gentleman who brought the case against her with the help of the ACLU and the Attorney General from the state of Washington, she had served him for almost 10 years for every type of event. In fact, she even said that she loved Rob. She would glad to serve him. She served him for any event. In fact, the only thing she could not do because of her faith in Jesus, that she could not participate in his same-sex wedding. And what's interesting about that, you don't hear that story in the media. What you hear is that she won't serve everyone. And not only does she love him, but she considers him a friend. And yet the state and the ACLU went after her anyway, and to take away her, not only her business, but personally, all of her assets, her house, her retirement, everything she has, merely for standing on her faith.
You know, from the outside looking in, it looks to me like that this is not really a personal thing between these homosexuals and the bakery or the flower shop, but they're being coerced by liberal groups as a test case to go after these people, that they're going in their own purpose so that they can bring these things before the court and shut down free speech. Is that your take on it?
It is. I mean, they know which Christian businesses are out there. And that's what's interesting. You know, our clients, they're not activists. They're not out in front. They're just making a living, mind their own business, and they're being targeted. When you have folks like you know, Jack and Baronelle, Chief Cochran, Blaine Adamson from the T-shirt company. They're just minding their own business, making a living and trying to apply their faith principles to making a living, and they're being targeted. And we hear so much from the left about we have to be tolerant, we have to be accepting. They are not tolerant.
That's right.
What they want to do is seek and destroy. If you don't jump onto the bandwagon, if you don't jump onto what's politically correct these days, they want to shut you down, they want to put you out of business. That's not the message we've heard from them all these years. This is definitely a different time.
And let me just say thank you again to ADF, because if you weren't doing these, if you weren't representing these clients free of charge to them, there is no way that Jack Phillips, Barronell, any of these people could fund these this litigation. So you guys are doing a tremendous service that is benefiting all the rest of us.
And it's, you know, it's there's nothing greater than coming alongside these folks and working with them to defend their faith, their free speech rights, and everybody else's too. That's what people need to understand. It's not about Barronell, it's not about Jack, it's not about Chief Cochran, it's about everyone. Because if the government can go after them for their faith beliefs, they can come after us. And they will, and they are. And like you mentioned, how does your normal person defend against the state of Washington or the state of Colorado, who has unlimited taxpayer dollars to do whatever they want? And it's one of those things where it's really our pleasure because these are great folks who stand for what they believe in, and the principles are extremely important for all of us.
Well, that's fantastic.
Well, David, let me ask you a personal question. How did you get involved with ADF? I'm assuming that you were a lawyer before you were associated with ADF, and it seems like that you probably gave up a personal practice or whatever. Why did you do that? How did you do it? What's happening?
I've been involved in this type of law, religious freedom issues, for about 25 years. I actually went to law school to practice this type of law. It was one of those things, kind of a long story, that the Lord called me into. Got a scholarship for law school, worked at an organization called ACLJ for about 10 years. And
we
then
know Jay Sekulow, we've had him on here.
Yeah, great attorney who works in this area of the law, who I learned under, and then moved over to ADF about 15 years ago. It's just a great organization. Alan Sears ran the organization since its inception. Mike Farris took over the last couple of years. These are great, godly men who have a zeal for the Constitution and protecting religious freedom and free speech rights. And it's really, I consider it to be a great job. It's a blessing to stand by these folks. And it's just a joy that I get to do this sort of work.
Well, I want to encourage you that you may not consider yourself a minister, but you know in Romans chapter 13, it talks about those in positions of authority, that they are ministers of God to us for good. And I think that God has placed you there, and man, you are fighting a battle just the same as I am. And thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and we have such a great group of folks here at ADF, and it's just, and that's, when we interview folks, that's the question I ask is this a calling for you, or is it just a job? And that's what really matters. We see this as a ministry, we see this as a calling, and so we certainly appreciate all that you do to help with the work that we do. So thank you also.
Well, that's great, David. There's another case that I thought maybe we could highlight tonight, and it's the Supreme Court of the United States just, I think, granted cert, is what we say as lawyers, which means they voted, 4 justices agreed that they wanted to hear the case and take it from the Court of Appeals, and it's the case of Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue. And this case, I think, has major potential to influence Christian education in America and giving parents an alternative to the public school system. Are you familiar with this at all, David?
I am. We're actually filing friend of the court briefs in that case.
What's it about?
So it's interesting, and I'll give you a little bit of history, but it's basically about people hear a lot about school choice these days. One thing that certain states do is they pass these tax credits. So the way the program works is they have these tax credits of different amounts, a small amount here in Montana, $150, but you could donate to a non-for-profit school tuition organization, they call it, and they're set up as 501c3s, and then they pass the money through to struggling students, sometimes financially, as in this case. And you can give it to public schools if you want to support kids in public schools with books and different expenses, all private schools, including religious private schools. And then here there was a challenge basically saying because some of that money goes to religious private schools along with everybody else, the neutrality principle, that it violates the state establishment clause in Montana. They're called Blaine Amendments. You may have heard of those. They're in a large majority of the states across the country. And those Blaine Amendments basically say there cannot be any money given to religious organizations of any form. And so that's the issue. That program was struck down, and the Supreme Court has now accepted that to hear that case. So
the Montana Supreme Court, or what court struck that down?
The Montana Supreme Court struck that down. And what's interesting about the case is its history. So we filed a brief on behalf of what's called an SSO, School Scholarship Organization, out of Arizona, with the Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization, that we litigated for school choice issues, and went all the way up to through the Ninth Circuit, by the way, where we lost, and then went up to the United States Supreme Court. And there they challenged that scholarship, that tax credit program, based on taxpayer standing. In other words, if someone pays taxes, there's this theory that they have a right to go around the country and challenge anything religious. And the great news was the court said, no, you don't have any legal injury, and upheld that tax credit program, which was a predecessor here. And we're actually representing that same organization, the Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization, in this case. So it's funny how these cases are related.
That's really great. So your position in the case, I take it, is that the Blaine Amendments are hostile to religion, and kind of like the Trinity Lutheran case, where the government there said, well, we can't give government funds for a playground at a Christian school, even though you'll give it to all these other schools. In this case, they're saying, well, you can't get scholarship tax credit money because you're religious. And your point is, well, that's discrimination against religion. That's a violation of the neutrality principle against us. Is that what you're saying?
It is, and what's interesting is a couple things in the what we call the AXTO case, the Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization case. The court said a couple things. First, they said tax credits are not public money. That's not money coming out of the public fisc. That's your own money that you decide it's private money you get to donate and then take a write-off just like any other write-off. And so that's an important principle, that not 100% of your paycheck is the government's money. It's actually your money until the government takes some of it. So that's an important principle, because that's something the left argues about all the time. The other principle is in Trinity Lutheran, that was a great outcome, 7-2. I had the pleasure of arguing that at the Supreme Court. And they basically held that this is not neutrality, but that this is hostile to religion. They actually said if you treat religious organizations worse than other similar organizations, that it's odious to the Constitution. So this case will be building upon Trinity Lutheran, and we're hoping for a really good result.
So because these were decided at the Supreme Court, does this have does it apply to all of the states? And does it mean that now that these tax credits and the playground and all this stuff, is that settled, or are people still going to be filing?
Well, this is a new case that's not been heard yet, but David, the potential of it is nationwide, right?
It is, and it's funny, to your question, the answer is yes and yes. What I mean by that is it's settled, but it's still going to be challenged. Groups on the left will not say, oh, we lost that fight, let's move on. They will keep fighting. Every situation, as you know, has different facts. And so there are no two cases with exactly the same facts. And so they'll say, well, that case doesn't apply because that was playground material, and this is a scholarship on a tax credit, so they're completely different. Well, it's the same principle, but you have to keep fighting to make sure you implement that Supreme Court ruling, even though it does apply everywhere.
So if the left was to start losing on a regular basis, which is the way it's turning at the moment and stuff, do you see any end in sight for this, or are they just going to keep beating this horse until it's dead?
Yeah, there's no end in sight. With folks that have strong ideological views, there's no giving up, because it's their worldview. It's the way they think things should be. And so when you carry it that way, you're going to continue to fight. You're going to continue to make sure that your worldview is implemented. You're going to fight for different judges and justices. You're going to vote that way. And it's the same thing conservative folks and Christian folks and people of faith need to do. They need to make sure that their voice is heard in the marketplace, in politics, in culture, in all those types of things, because any issue that's a political issue or a cultural issue, it's a biblical issue first.
Well, in just about 4 or 5 minutes, we're going to be taking questions. And so if you have a question for David or Richard or me, please text that in to us. But let me just say that I think that this is the reason we see the split in America becoming so wide is because they have been using the courts, as Michael Ferris said, to push their agenda. And Trump has totally upset the apple cart, not only in the Supreme Court, but in the appellate court level. There are hundreds of judges that have been appointed, and I think that they see the end of the way that they've been forcing their agenda, and they are just radical. They're doing everything. They're panicking.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion, that I think that these legal things that you guys are doing in ADF, I think it's really having an impact, and it's one of the things that's caused them to just become, I mean, totally extreme. They've lost all sense of, you know, like in the abortion issue of women's rights. They're now wanting to kill the child once it's totally born. I mean, they've just taken their mask off and exposed themselves.
Well, you know, the courts have been the liberals' center of political power for 50 years or more, and 60 years, and now they're threatened with losing that. Boy, they are running scared, and I think this is amazing, David. What you guys are doing is incredible. I think you're really making a long-term difference in the culture of this nation, so that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, and I, you know, people should keep in mind that the battle is on every front.
Right.
It's in the court system, it's in the legislature, it's in the culture. I mean, you talk about the pro-life battle. That's a perfect example. Even though it's been decades since Roe versus Wade and that shame of a decision and legalizing abortion, we have a more pro-life culture now than we've ever had. And that's because there's so many great organizations and technology is advanced, and we know that's a life. It's not a clump of tissues like they used to say. So it's important that people fight on all fronts in the culture, because not only do you have to change the laws, both from the court and the legislature, but you have to change people's hearts and minds. And I think that's one thing that we should all be striving for.
Well, you know, David, every January for years, I've been having on an entire week's worth of programmings of interviewing people who survived abortion, people whose children died during abortion, and all kinds of things. And I've been fighting this. But if you would have asked me 3 years ago, would we ever get to a place that they are actually talking about the possibility of overturning Roe versus Wade or kicking it back to the states, I wouldn't have seen that 3 years ago. I think that we are seeing a huge cultural shift in the attitudes, and I've seen one statistic that I think it's 60-something% of Americans are against at least late-term abortions. I mean, the whole attitude is changing. Are you seeing that? Are you dealing with any of those cases?
Yeah, we are. We have an entire team that works on just life issues. That's all that we do. And what's interesting about it is, I think what happens is, I think folks on the left go too far sometimes. Like we're seeing how they go after Christians, like Barronelle and like the Chief and like Jack and all these folks. They're not satisfied. They say, well, all we want is civil unions. All we want is domestic partnerships. All we want is marriage equality. All we want is these type of things. What they really want is they want special rights. They want to make sure that everyone capitulates to whatever their agenda is. And I think what happens is that it's the same thing with the pro-life movement and pushing abortion. They go too far, and the pendulum swings back where people say, wait a minute, you're not respecting others' beliefs. You talk about tolerance. For example, marriage has been between a man and a woman for thousands of years across all cultures, all religions, all societies. It's the bedrock of nations, yet you try to destroy marriage and the family. And I think what happens is often, regardless whether you're talking about the life issues or those issues, I think they get too aggressive and push too far. And I think it ends up coming back on them.
And you know, we've often said that if you legalize this, then what's going to be the next step? And of course, they just throw that out. But I just saw last week that the American Psychiatric Association now said it is bigotry to outlaw polygamy, that there ought to be multiple partners and that ought to all be sanctioned. And so we see this slippery slope. Yeah.
I saw a news piece today about a school in New York, I think it was, where they're instructing their teachers that polyamory or something like that is to be accepted, and that's where basically groups of kids all in sexual relationship together is acceptable. That you're not to tell them it's not or anything like that.
They shouldn't even be allowing sexual relationships
at all
among kids at all, much less polygamy or whatever.
It's incredible.
And that was one of the points we made during what we call the marriage battles, is that marriage has a specific definition between a man and woman, consenting adults, obviously. And once you get rid of that premise, then you get rid of what marriage is, and it invites all these arguments that you're talking now about polygamy and other types of marriages, because you've better broken down, what marriage is about.
Well, I tell you, it's a mess, and praise God for ADF and people like you that are standing up, and I believe we're gaining ground.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. All right, it's time to take some questions. Have we got any questions?
Yeah, we've got a few questions coming in. Well, here's one from Teal for Jesus on chat. And this person asks, is there any way to argue that these, and I think what she's asking here is, why is it that these groups never seem to come after Muslims or Buddhists or other religious businesses, but it's always after the Christians? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is I think we're easy targets. I think we have short memories. There's a lot of folks in the church who believe that the church shouldn't get involved in quote unquote politics. It's interesting to me because, as I mentioned before, no matter what issue we're discussing in politics, it's a biblical issue first. Mm-hmm. There's no area of life that doesn't involve values and folks' beliefs and your faith. And so I think we're I don't know if the word too forgiving is, but I think the problem is that people need to take a stand, and oftentimes Christians don't and won't, and that's why these folks like Barronell and the Chief and Jack and Blaine and our clients, they're heroes, because they're willing to take a stand to say, look, enough is enough, and I'm not only fighting on behalf of myself, but I'm fighting on behalf of others. No matter what you believe or don't, we don't want the government telling you what you can and can't say, what types of events you need to promote. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that folks just need to get involved at, again, whatever level they find themselves.
And I think I can answer that in a way maybe that you can't, David, because you got to worry about what people think about you. I don't give a rip. But you know what? I believe that it's demonic. It is a spirit of Antichrist, is what John called it, and therefore there isn't a spirit of anti-Islam or anti-Buddha or anti-anything else. This is demonic. It is Satan coming against the Lord Jesus Christ and any of His followers, trying to shut us up in our influence so that He can literally take over the lives of people. Yeah. I believe it's a spiritual battle. And because of that, praise God for what you're doing, but the church needs to stand up. We need to be speaking out on these things, because we're the ones that can counter Satan's assault. Yeah, no question. It says in the Word that the devil comes to steal the Word, and what he's after is to shut us up and silence our witness for Christ, right? Absolutely. There was
what's interesting about it is you mentioned the church. It used to be that whatever issues of the day came up, they were discussed on Sunday in church.
Absolutely.
So, railroads coming through, new taxes coming through, whatever the cultural issues were, that's where you went to discuss it. And then, of course, we have all these rules that the IRS makes up and puts out there. And now churches are afraid to get involved. And obviously, it's part of the work we do in defending churches to speak about cultural issues of the day. But that's where it should be discussed. That's where people need to look at, how does the Bible inform this issue? How does the Bible inform marriage? How does it inform about abortion and life issues? And I think that's why the church needs to be involved and needs to take a stand, both inside the church and, of course, outside the church.
You sound like David Barton.
Yeah, he does.
David's always talking about what the sermons were like back in the founding of this nation. And let me just put in a plug that David Barton is one of our board members for Truth and Liberty, along with Bill Federer and Lance Wallnow and Karen Conrad and myself. And praise God, I believe we're beginning to make an inroad.
That's right. That's awesome. Great. Well, here's another question. We've got, what does the pursuit of happiness as an unalienable right mean for Christians? I think what this viewer is asking is that the LGBT folks will say, well, we're just pursuing happiness. Why isn't this our right to do what we want to do? And do you have any thoughts on that one, David? How is it that two people of the same sex marrying is not a fundamental right guaranteed under the Constitution?
Yeah, I think one of the problems is when you have decisions like Roe versus Wade or the Obergefell marriage decision, any critic of the law will tell you there's no basis in the Constitution for those decisions. You may support same-sex marriage, you may not. First of all, marriage was an issue that belonged to the states, not the federal government, not the federal courts. And so if it were to happen, it should have happened at the state level. So we have these non-existent rights being created out of thin air. And so folks who are honest about those decisions realize it has no grounding besides the religious issues and other types of issues. It has no grounding in the law. But it's one of those things where, pursuing happiness is this general concept. The way we look at it is there specific protection for whatever it happens to be in the Constitution? And I think both with abortion and same-sex marriage, it's just simply not there, and it's created out of whole cloth. And I think that's one of the problems with those type of things. There's the right that's created, and the actual right to free exercise of religion and free speech somehow takes plays second fiddle to those other created rights.
I just saw on the news last night that they had the gay pride thing yesterday, and it was the 50th anniversary of that homosexual nightclub where they had the raid and stuff. So anyway, they had people dressed terrible. They were dressed in drag. And there was a little 8-year-old boy standing there with his mother and grandmother saying that I'm so proud of this. And I'm sure he's not a homosexual, but somehow or another he's been taught. And he even said, love is love. Whether it's between two men, two women, between a man and a dog, or whatever. And I tell you, it is perverse, the things that are being done. And we've got to speak out on this because it's detrimental. If you destroy marriage between a man and a woman, just make it available to anybody, it'll not only destroy relationships, I believe it'll destroy this nation.
Absolutely. Well, David, you mentioned the Obergefell case. That's a hard word to say, but that's the gay marriage decision from 2015. And one of the things about that case that is just almost tragic is that the opinion was written by a Justice Kennedy, that was, considered to be a conservative when he was put on the bench. And I'd be curious to hear your comments about how important it is that we know what a person's, especially a judge's worldview is, and not just a judge, but the politicians who appoint the judges. It strikes me that we need to understand not just, they're conservative about economic issues or low taxes or that kind of thing, but do they see the world through the biblical lens? Do they understand biblical morality and those principles? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, regardless of which side you're on, regardless of what your views are, you have to be informed when you're talking about elections, as I mentioned, because of all the judges and justices that are appointed. Even on the state level, some are appointed, some are elected, but people need to get involved, need to know who those folks are that are running for judicial office, who are going to be appointed. And the reason for that is everybody has a worldview. So whether you're on the left or right, you have a worldview. That's the way you think, that's the way you operate. And we see that in the confirmation hearings, how they're getting and how they've been for a while, and it's getting worse. You see at the district court level, the circuit court level, that Christians are being mocked for their faith and given a hard time because they believe in what the Bible says. And so it's one of those things where people need to understand that the folks that they're putting in office, the folks that they're electing, and those who appoint others, they're going to carry a worldview. And a lot of times you can see what their record is. What have they voted for before? What have they stood for? What is their worldview? Is it a secular worldview? Is it a biblical worldview? And that's what the left understands, and those on the right need to understand that also.
And let me just point out that if you go to our truthandliberty.net website, we have a list on there of all of the elected officials. You can put in your zip code and it will take you over to another. We're partnering with other websites, and it'll take you there. You can find out who your officials are, and you can see their voting record on every single thing. So you don't have to go blind. Like we had Jared Polis become the governor here in Colorado, and I mean, they have been pushing homosexual bill after bill after bill through. And I've actually talked to some Christians who didn't even realize that he was a homosexual and stuff, and yet he was very open with it. Right after Trump was elected, I saw a commercial that he came on, and he was blasting Trump, and then he kissed his male partner and said, "Take that, President Trump." And wow. He did that long before he ran for governor, and yet people don't know. They aren't informed. Wow. So again, our Truth and Liberty website is a good place that you can get information on these officials.
Absolutely.
Have we got any other questions?
Well, let's see here. Here's a question. It seems like that the society is becoming more and more, seems more acceptable to punish people or fight against them, when they don't agree with you. This is the political correctness that seems to pervade our society. And are we in danger as a culture of believing that that's an acceptable way of handling disagreements? David, do you understand what I'm trying to say here? It seems like that's becoming a new norm in America. It used to be everyone understood, well, there's freedom of speech. You have a right to your opinion, but I don't beat you up because of it. Are we facing a serious situation here with how strong this PC culture has become?
We are, and I think one of the problems, one of the things that we're always concerned about is the principle. Someone may not like what someone believes or what someone says, but anytime you want to enforce some sort of orthodoxy, prohibit them from speaking, requiring them to speak, punishing them for speaking, you open yourself up to the same punishment. And so one of the things I'm always concerned with folks on the left is they say, well, we don't like what Barronelle believes, or we don't like what Jack believes, and we're going to punish them for it. That can easily turn on them. And so we think that the answer to speech you don't like is more speech. It's not punishing that. One of the great things about our country is we have some of the best free speech protections in the entire world, and we shouldn't be punishing people for taking views that maybe the majority doesn't agree with, because that majority is going to change. We've seen that historically. And one of my worries is the lack of principle sometimes that comes from the left is not respecting someone's opposing views, but now if you're not politically correct with the current agenda from folks on the left or some politicians or maybe the media, that you're going to be punished for doing so. And that, again, that's a recipe. Once folks change in the media or folks change in politics, that can come back on them. And I think that's just a dangerous principle.
Well, let me bring this back to something real current. That just the 1st of July, I think it was Nike had that shoe that had the Betsy Ross flag on the heel or something. And Colin Kapernick said that reminded him of slavery. And because of that, Nike pulled it. And I just think that that's exactly what you're talking about, David, is that people, instead of, just, well, this offended me. Some people may be offended because you wear pink. Some people may be offended because of whatever. Some things you just need to pull your thumb out of your mouth and get over it, and you can't limit other people's freedom just because you got a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, that's right. Well, last week we had Bill Federer on. He made a great point. He said, yeah, Betsy Ross was a Quaker. And the Quakers were the first people to fight against slavery. So the Kaepernick is not only un-American, he's ill-informed, I think.
He's ill-informed. And most of the people who are coming against tearing down all of these Confederate monuments and on and on and on you go, they don't have a clue about stuff. I've got a guy that just was challenging Washington and Jefferson because they owned slaves. And what they don't realize is that back when the colonies, before our independence, Britain was ruling and slavery was the law, and you could not free slaves. Matter of fact, Jefferson and Washington both petitioned Great Britain to outlaw slavery in the 1760s, and Great Britain wouldn't do it. So anyway, they're totally ill-informed about all of this stuff, and I tell you, ignorance is contagious.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It is.
So, David, what can the average person out there do? They may not be a party to a lawsuit. They may not be a politician, but what can they do in their life to fight for freedom and stand up for religious liberty?
Yeah, I think everyone should get involved wherever they find themselves, whether it happens to be at the local school, if they're a parent, to get involved, to run for the school board, at their place of employment. There's obviously these issues are all over the country. So one of the biggest things is find out what's going on where you live. Get involved in that. Speak up. I think one of the things that the left does effectively is they band together, so it seems like there's a lot of people fighting for that particular issue, and it may not be. And folks on the right sometimes don't do a good enough job of stepping out, of having their voice heard. Find out what's going on at your kid's school. Find out what's going on in your local community. Find out what local laws. A lot of these laws we're talking about that are used to punish Jack and Barronelle and our clients are local laws, and yet people allow them to pass in their own town without speaking up, without going to the local city council sessions, without informing people in their church. So there's a lot people can do. Again, you can go on adflegal.org and find out what's going on in all parts of the country, because I guarantee something's happening where you live, regardless of where that is.
And you're probably aware of this, David, but there was a gang of four, they called it in Colorado, that they have a video out called the Rocky Mountain Heist. And they got together, and of course they were well funded. They were all millionaires and one billionaire. But they started at the local level with school boards and just started forcing these things in and passing these local laws. So really, we're talking about federal, we're talking about the entire nation, but really it starts with you getting involved wherever you are. And I just encourage you that as Christians, we've got to stand up and speak out. And I believe that God personally is going to hold us accountable for how things are going. It was Charles Finney that said if the United States ever goes ungodly, that the fault lies solely at the feet of the clergy. And I tell you what, we need to speak up. And if you're in a church where the minister isn't speaking out in love, you need to go to him and start informing him and talking to him and giving him materials. But praise God, we got to start speaking out on these things.
That's right. And you know, elections have consequences.
Absolutely.
And next year's an election year, and the whoever's elected in 2020 is going to have the power to appoint federal judges. And all this progress that has been made in the last 2-3 years is on the line, literally. And I mean, right now the conservatives on the Supreme Court have sometimes they have a 5-4 majority, right? And it's just very tenuous. And so if we just sit back as believers and think that, oh, it's all taken care of now, Donald Trump's in office, we don't have to worry about it anymore, then we're going to be right back where we started from. And
plus, so much of what Donald Trump has done has been through executive order that isn't law, and if you change the government, they can undo all of those executive orders. We could be back where we were or worse.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be the same place. It'll be worse if we lose and the conservatives lose in the 2020 elections.
Yeah. And you know, it's so important that Christians, all voters, but Christians need to be informed and vote according to biblical principles. You know, someone was talking to me the other day about, oh, how can you vote for Trump? He said such mean things and nasty things. And I'm saying, because of what he's doing and what he stands for, and I know David can't get into politics here, but we can. And I'm saying, you know, we need to understand these issues, and these things affect real life, and they have long-term consequences.
David, we've only got a minute and 17 seconds. Could you again quickly give ADF's website, how people could get involved and support what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's adflegal.org and 1-800-TELL-ADF. You can look up all of our cases, all the issues that we're working on, and again, prayer support, financial support. But the biggest thing, and I encourage everyone, is find out what's going on around you and speak up wherever you find yourself. Just get involved, because one person does make a difference.
Well, praise God. Thank you again for everything you're doing. And man, I don't know where we'd be if it wasn't for ADF and ACLJ and other lawyers who are getting involved in that arena. So thanks to all of you who have watched us tonight. I hope that you go to that site and get involved and help support them. And remember that every Monday night you can watch Truth and Liberty livecast, not only on all of our feeds, but CTN carries this. Thanks again for CTN for everything they've done. Thank you for being a part of this. God bless you, and praise God, we believe we are making a difference and that this nation is returning to the Lord. Amen. So thanks again, David. Thanks for all of you watching us, and God bless you. We'll see you again next Monday for our Truth and Liberty livecast.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net or by calling our phone center at 719-635-1111. Our prayer ministers are there to help you with your donations and to pray with you.